SEO is when someone goes to Google and looking for something related to what you do, that Google says, hey, you should go check out this podcast to get that information. You want the most relevant SEO as possible. You want your content to be search engine optimized, so when people are looking for it, Google points to your direction. That's how you get organic traffic. That's how you get organic interest.
Most hosts never achieve the results they hoped for. They're falling short on listenership and monetization, meaning their message isn't being heard and their show ends up costing them money. This podcast was created to help you grow your listenership and make money while you're at it. Get ready to take notes. Here's your host, Adam Adams.
Welcome back to the podcast on podcasting. And today I'm joined with Brenden Mulligan, who actually is founder of a company you probably heard, Webpage. And if you haven't heard it, you probably ought to try it. Most of you know that my team, we serve a lot of podcasters. I've got 3 podcasts myself, 2 in the real estate space, and then this one. And then we also serve about 60 or more now podcast clients with just different podcasts. And one thing that we started doing just recently, I would say just over the last couple of months, actually, even though the company, Brenden founded it back in 2020, we just grabbed a hold of it recently. And what we did is I had one of my virtual assistants take one of the podcasts that we produce, and I had them jump into Webpage just to see if it was something we should be using. And the feedback that I got was that it was super easy to create a podcast page, literally like a podcast website. And she said that even though she's never built a website ever in her whole life, my virtual assistant said that it took less than 3 minutes. She said it was easy, took less than 3 minutes. And when I went to the website, it's totally branded. Like, I don't even know how this could have taken 3 minutes or less. So Brenden is on the podcast right now, and we're going to be talking just a little bit about kind of, if you don't yet have a website for your podcast, you need one. That's the first thing. And then if you need one, what are your options out there? How much do the different versions cost to make? What does it cost to hire somebody to create a website? We're going to be talking a little bit about that so that you can really have a podcast website yourself for your show. And we'll talk about how it can be branded. So Brenden, just first and foremost, your bio is already in the show notes, so people can scroll down. I'm really curious though, like, what inspired you to create? I mean, I think you have like 1,000 or 10,000 clients right now, something nuts like that. And it's like, when I was a sponsor at an event, like a couple of months ago, this is around the time we heard of you, either just before that, or maybe it was at the event. But the point is, I don't know very many people that want to start a service-based business that can serve that many people. And so I'm just curious kind of how that inspired you in the first place.
What do you mean a service-based business that can?
Yeah, like for example, me and my company, we've got maybe like 60 or more clients. It's not thousands. Mm-hmm. And although I think it would be kind of cool to serve like thousands of people, mm-hmm. It's not really my business model. I want to be like, I just want to be connected with my client, know my client, be intimately like part of all the decisions for what they do with their podcast, and support them and consult with them. And so there's a couple of ways to start a business. You can start like Coca-Cola that serves thousands or millions of people. Mm-hmm. Or you could be like an attorney and work with just 2 or 3 people at a time, for example. And you decided to go the route where you're like, I got to get this out there for lots of people. And I'm just curious, like, I assume that there was a need, that you knew that there was some type of need, but I'd like you to elaborate on like what made you decide to start a company that can serve that many people.
Gotcha. So I've been working with creative people my entire career. I started in the music industry, actually, and in the traditional music industry, and then realized there was a lot of things that basically were super easy to do, but required someone to do them all the time as a musician. And essentially, like, musicians should spend all their time writing songs or practicing for their shows or being on the road. Like, they shouldn't be dealing with data management or website building. And so I found this in every creator class that I've worked with, which is like, you should be focused on creating what you create. Podcasters should be focused on creating great content and getting it out there, not figuring out how to run a mailing list or building a website. And so a lot of times these things actually seem harder than they are. Like, building a website is very hard. But with the right framework in place, you can actually build a website that looks great without doing a ton of work. I think Squarespace is a great example of that, right? They have way more customers than I do. And a lot of people have Squarespace websites and they all look great. And so what I really looked at was when I was talking to podcasters, I noticed a couple of things. One, most podcasters didn't have their own website that I was looking at. And so what would happen is when you would search them on Google, the number one result on Google was their Apple page or Spotify or Google Podcasts or whatever, but it was never a page that they owned. I saw this in the music industry too, with MySpace and Facebook and some of those sites. And if you don't have a direct relationship with your user base, and I can talk about this later, but like you're missing out on a huge amount of opportunity and a longer term relationship for your business that will be a good thing over time. Someone with 1 million downloads on Apple is great, but someone with 1 million downloads on Apple and a 10,000 or 100,000 person on their mailing list is much better and has a much better opportunity to monetize that audience and bigger opportunity. So anyway, I was noticing that a lot of podcasters just weren't going through the trouble to build their own website. And so I looked at the options they had, WordPress being one of them. WordPress is this amazing platform, but relatively complicated when you really get into it. There was on the lower end that most podcasters had a web page that came with their host, landing page, which was good, but a lot of times they weren't utilizing it. And then they had Squarespace. And Squarespace is great, but it's relatively hard to turn that into a podcast specific website. And so I just think I saw the opportunity to take the RSS feed, to pull in the data and to display it in a really easy to consume way. It looked a lot better than the host sites, wasn't as complicated as WordPress. So that's kind of the need that I saw. As to why go after like a big market versus a small market, I think for me, like I'm a software person, not really a services person. So I don't even think of it as a services company. Okay. It does provide a website service. I forget what they're called, but there's a podcasting website service company where you're actually hiring a person. They have a designer, they work with you. It's very expensive. Okay. And you, at the end of it, you have like a custom built WordPress website. That to me is a great service. It just takes a lot of people to do it. But the reason that it takes 3 minutes on Podpage is all powered by software. So we built a framework that allows you to spin up these websites based with all of your content, and then a layer of customization that makes it feel like you can really make it your site, even though every 10,000 other podcasters are using basically the same group of customizations. So, it's surprisingly, like, as we've grown, I was talking to my wife about this last night, that even though like we've gotten to be massive, customer support, amount of time for customer support every day is almost similar to the beginning, because it's a little bit more, but it's not like 10,000 times more because we have all these users. It's just most people need help when they're getting their website set up, and then it just goes, right? These websites stay up to date as you release stuff into the RSS feed. They stay up to date as new reviews are posted to Twitter, your Apple Podcasts, we pull those in. It just sort of is a set it and forget it thing. So in the tech world, we would say it's a scalable business, because the more customers we get doesn't mean necessarily we have the same amount of work that we have to put in. So
makes sense. One of the things that I think I heard you say, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that a lot of podcasters don't end up starting their own podcast page, like a website, because they're not sure how to do it, or it costs them too much money, or they don't want to do it themselves. And so they kind of let that go on the back page. But what I think I heard you say is that, like, if you don't if you don't have control of any of that, like, you could probably lose the game. You might not be able to make as much money, you sell as many products, you might not be able to serve as many people at the level that you really want to serve if you're simply just relying on like Apple and Google and Stitcher and iHeart only for people to just be able to download. So like, can you go into more detail on just specifically like the benefits of why you would even want to have a website for this?
Yeah. So, and I actually will say this problem could be solved with you don't necessarily need a website. I don't know if you're familiar with Substack, which is like a newsletter platform. You could launch a newsletter. But I think the key thing is, I always say, I think I'm starting to date myself, but if you think about MySpace, about like 12 years ago, MySpace was huge. In the music, there was no easier place to upload music and start connecting with people than MySpace. And all these musicians, I was in the music industry, were these record labels and musicians were pouring millions and millions of dollars into getting as many friends on MySpace as you can get. And the thing about friends on MySpace is the only way to get in touch with them is to post on MySpace. So you're locked into that platform. And even though you might have 1 million friends on MySpace, you only really have one way of getting in touch with them. You don't really know who they are. And so when MySpace sort of basically imploded 12 years ago, they lost their entire fan base and they had to rebuild it. And a lot of them scurried over to Facebook or Twitter and tried to rebuild it. And at that point in the music industry, I was kind of one of the people pounding the drum saying, like, you're going to lose them there too. Like, connect with them on Twitter, but make sure to get some sort of personal connection with the people who are consuming your content. So switching over to podcasts, take Tim Ferriss for an example. I think he's had like 400 million downloads, or I don't know what the number is now. It's astronomical. All he knows about those people from Apple is like the number, right? Or like maybe the country they're in. He has no way of getting in touch with them, right? He hopes they hit the subscribe button, and he hopes that when he releases an episode, Apple's push notification service does well enough to like deliver that into people's mailbox. And he hopes that Apple Podcasts will put his episode at the top, but if someone subscribes to like 10 episodes, they might not even see his, you're so reliant on these platforms. Yeah. And so what he does is he says, hey, in every episode, he's like, if you're interested in learning more or connecting with me, go and sign up for my 5 Bullet Friday newsletter. Go to tim.blog and sign up. And he's got a couple million people sign up for that. And that is what he considers like his core distribution channel as far as information to his customers, his listeners. And so I think the easiest way to do that is with a website, because on your podcast, you can say, hey, thanks for listening today. Go to podcastonpodcasting.com and connect with us. And you can have voicemail. You can say, like, leave me a voicemail, sign up for my mailing list, send me a message. You can do whatever you want, but it gives you a surface to play on. And then when someone does that, you actually have my email address. And so when a new episode comes out, you can email me. Or if you want to start selling ebook about podcasting, well, how are you going to do that through Apple, right? You can release a new episode, but you can't ping all of the people who have ever listened to you. But if you've got their email address, you can totally reach out to them. So I think having a direct relationship with your audience and being able to reach them on your terms is critical. I think that like the distribution that Spotify, Apple, all these services give for free is like one of the best things in the world. It's incredible. Obviously, they benefit. Apple sells a lot of devices because of their podcasting stuff, and so does everyone else. But so it's amazing to utilize the distribution channels, but still like don't rely everything on the distribution channels. So that's generally my advice.
I definitely got it. And a question's coming to mind, wondering about like this distribution channel and the fact that like not all of your listeners will convert. For example, I do know that an old podcast of mine had several 100,000 downloads, nothing like these millions that the person you were just mentioning had, but several 100,000 downloads. But people that had joined like our email list was only about 6,000. And people that had bought some of our products was even smaller. And it's like, well, 6,000 is still pretty decent. But the thought that I would have, regardless of what that number is, add a zero, take away a zero, it doesn't matter. The point would be, if I'm a listener and I'm saying, I'm not sure, Brenden, like, I don't know why I would want to care to put some people directly in front of me, because it's not like I would get them all anyway. I might get 10%. What are your thoughts there?
Well, you're never going to get them all, but I think you'll probably get the ones that are going to be the most likely to be interested in what you have to say, right? So I listen to a lot of podcasts and I'm like, they're the podcasts that if they're in my subscription list, and if I burn through all my other ones, I'll listen to it and I like it, but I'm not really like a true fan. I'll always listen to those certain podcasts first that I'm a true fan of. And so I don't know if it was a book or a blog post or what the original thing was. It was called 100 or 1,000 True Fans. And the premise of it was, I forget what they were saying. Maybe it was $10 a month or something, but they were just like, if you just had 1,000 people who are willing to give you $5 a month, $10, I forget their model, but you can make a living off of only 1,000 people. People are going to Twitter and Facebook and launching a podcast, hoping to get tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of listens, but you really only need that 1,000 people who really, really care about you. And this is why like Patreon and those kind of services work really well. Because if you can just get 1,000 people to commit to giving you $10 a month, that's a damn good business for most people. Yeah. And so, I think it actually helps. You want to have hundreds of thousands of listeners or whatever, but if you only get a few thousand to subscribe, like when you send like a t-shirt, if you're going to release a t-shirt and say, hey, I'm selling t-shirts now, like those people are probably the most likely that are going to be interested in it. So I think it's totally fine. You should set the expectation. You're only going to probably convert 1 to 10% of the people who listen to the podcast actually to. Most people don't care about coming to your website, the average person, because they can just get it through Apple. But the people who do care, again, you're building like a more solid relationship with them. So,
yeah, I think you're right. It makes total sense. When you mentioned the 1,000 True Fans, I was trying to remember, because I believe that I've read that book. Is it like a Malcolm Gladwell book or no?
I don't know if it was a book or if it was a blog. I think it's been used and recycled so many times. I actually don't know who to attribute it to. But I'm sure if you search, everyone's thrown in their thoughts on it.
Yeah, Kevin Kelly wrote Creators Only Needed. There's too much. Maybe it's Kelly. So at any rate, you're saying that it is important. It is helpful. You're also saying it shouldn't be the only thing either. We should be able to focus on multiple different channels. Now that we're talking about that it is important and that most of us should do it if we don't already have a website, A, what's the easiest way to get that website? And B, what's the easiest way to convert the website so that it is getting people on your list so that you can contact them?
Yeah. So A being, what's the best way to build one?
Yeah.
I'm a big advocate, regardless of everything I just said, I'm a big advocate, even if you don't have a way of getting people on a list, to own some part of the internet that is yours. So if you're a Buzzsprout customer or Simplecast, or most of the hosts will give you a free basic website that lists your episodes, it's built automatically. It's part of your deal, part of what you're paying for. And most of them will let you put your own domain name. So I say at the very minimum, go to Google Domains, spend the $12, buy your .com or whatever, put it on your Buzzsprout page, and then make that the canonical link for your podcast. Because what will happen is Google will start actually putting that as the number one result. And that's because Google sees like a million links from Apple, including your podcast. But if someone's searching for podcast on podcasting and they see podcastonpodcasting.com, Google just naturally says like, well, that's it. That's the website for this. And so you can do that for free with whatever host you're doing. And if you have an existing website, like let's say you have podcasterscounseling.com or whatever, and you have a podcast associate, you can also make a subdomain. So you can do like podcast.yourdomain.com and do that. Yeah. So regardless if you collect email addresses, I would do that no matter what. Because again, you're going to get the number one spot on Google over time. And and you can potentially utilize that later when you want to.
What do you mean you're going to get the number one spot on Google over time? It's like, you're saying that if we have a dedicated podcast website, and we continue to update it, even if it's like an automated RSS feed update, which to a listener that doesn't know what that is, in brief, because I'm not the tech guy, Brenden is, but basically all it is, it's the automatic feed of the podcast itself that's been published can be displayed in many different places at the same time, including a website. So that's like the RSS feed. But Brenden, you're saying like, actually, there's another question that I'm even more passionate about right now. So that's what I want to ask. If you don't mind, with the decision that we have to make is basically like, should we have a dedicated website of just our podcast? And it might be called ourpodcast.com. Mm-hmm. Should we have a blog that we somehow incorporate the RSS feed? Mm-hmm. Or should we do the subdomain as you stated before? For example, like my company is called Grow Your Show. My podcast is called The Podcast on Podcasting. So essentially, this is what I'm asking. Should I have podcastonpodcasting.com, or should I have like podcast.growyourshow.com, or even growyourshow.com/podcast, which might contain the RSS feed? Is there a pro or a con there?
I think you just asked one of the hardest questions to answer, because it's hard because there isn't a black and white answer. What I usually advise people is like, what is the brand that you're going to be spending a ton of time building? And what do you think people are going to be focusing on? Like, what are people going to be searching for over time? And so if you feel like the main brand that you're building is podcast on podcasting, and that's what people go to Google, that's what they're going to be looking for, you might want to consider having your own podcast site just for your podcast. If Grow the Show is the brand that you're really building,
Grow Your Show. There's another company out there with the other name, so I got it.
Yeah. So if that's the case, then it might be better to have growyourshow.com/podcast, right? That just might be the way to do it. It really comes down to the individual and what they want to do. Okay. So it's kind of like, I know a lot of people, their podcast is their main business. And then they also maybe have an ebook, or they also have a consultancy. For them, the podcast is what they want up front. And so the way I think about it is like, if on your business website, you think the podcast is so important that would be the majority of the content on your homepage, and you probably want a podcast site. Like with Podpage, you can create a page that has all the podcast stuff up front. You can put customizations on there too with other information, and you can have sub pages for whatever else you want. But if you flip it and it's like, oh no, I'm a consultant or I'm a coach. Coaching is my business. I want my main site to be all about coaching. I have a podcast to draw attention to my business, but my main thing is coaching. Then maybe you want like a small section of your WordPress site to be your podcast. And then when it comes down to like, if you want like part of your site to be your podcast space, or if you want a subdomain like podcast.coaching.com, that usually comes down to just like how fully featured you want your podcast site to be. Because it's easy to build like a small folder that you put some posts in and it just shows like different episodes. If that's easy for you on WordPress or whatever platform you're on, that's great. Some other people are like, I don't want to even deal with that. So they do podcast.coachingservice.com. So, but it's not a straightforward answer. It really depends on the person. The majority of our users, I would say that the vast majority of our users just have a podcast and they want to create a website for their podcast. And that's their core focus.
I definitely have a ton of questions. And the first one, and it can be a short answer if possible. I'm wondering if having both is a benefit or a drawback, partly because I've heard that some types of sites prefer what I think is called not organic content, native content. And so I'm a little curious, like, should I maybe start one for the podcast and connect the RSS feed and also grow your show at the same time? Or should I be focusing on one or the other and putting all my eggs in one basket and watching it like a hawk, like some famous investor had said once before? So should I do both?
I think the one thing you shouldn't do is duplicate all the content. And
wait. The one thing I should not do is duplicate the content?
Yeah, like you shouldn't just have like the same exact information and try to get both of them get bigger.
Okay.
I think the hardest position to be in would be, hey, I've got a podcast, I have a business. I like them both equally as much, and I want them both to grow at the exact same rate. Most people aren't in that role, right? Most people are like, I have a podcast to support my business, or I have a ebook to support my podcast, or something. Usually it's a little more straightforward. What sometimes people will do is they'll say, they'll basically have on their core website, they'll have like a podcast page. If they want some content about their podcast on their core website, they will then just have you go to it and it gives a basic overview and you click it and it takes you to the whole podcast page, right?
Okay.
And so they're like, if you want my podcast content, it's here, but we will link to it. And then on their podcast page, they'll link back to their main page. But like I said, it really is so situational. I think when you and I met at Podcast Movement in person, I think I remember. And like, I would say 20% of the conversations I had, people coming up to the booth was like this kind of question, like, how should I think about this?
Yeah. So one of the reasons to do this, and I don't know if you use these exact words, so if I'm putting words in your mouth, forgive me, but it just sounds like or feels like what you're saying is that having a page that is updated frequently and can eventually become the number one searchable thing when somebody like searches it on a search engine like Google is like that. Having this page update frequently, it has something to do with SEO, being SEO friendly, being ranked higher on Google. And it sounds like a benefit of that is one of the ways to get that benefit is to not just simply duplicate the content. But for my opinion, is it does sound like you're saying that that's one of the reasons why we ought to consider having a dedicated podcast page, either through Podpage or Squarespace or WordPress or whatever. Is that right? Or am I like totally off base and has nothing to do with SEO?
No, it's everything to do with SEO. I mean, you know, what is SEO? SEO is when someone goes to Google and looking for something related to what you do, that Google says, hey, you should go check out this podcast to get that information, right? You want the most relevant SEO as possible. It's SEO for anyone, is search engine optimization. You want your content to be search engine optimized, so when people are looking for it, Google points to your direction. That's how you get organic traffic. That's how you get organic interest. So, and right now, Apple and all these other services are well built where Google will be like, well, if you're looking for the podcast on podcasting, we should probably show them the Apple podcast page. We should probably show them the Spotify page. But when you build your own site and it's got the domain name that is similar to what the show is called, Google will put that above all those others because they'll be like, well, this is probably the main place to get information on it because they've got the domain and it's a standalone site. It's not just one page on Apple's giant podcasting database. So that's why I'm saying, like, by getting that domain and just getting it in place, you're going to build up the history because Google also cares a lot about history. They're going to point all of their visitors to one and say, this is the number one place you should go. It's probably not going to be a place that was created yesterday. They need to see that other places are linking to it. They need to see that it's being updated on a regular basis. And so just getting it in place will start helping with the SEO thing.
As with somebody with your experience and like being actually part of a lot of these podcast pages, like over 10,000, out of curiosity, is there a number? You mentioned updating the website regularly. Is there a number that means regularly? Is once a month regular? Is twice a month regular? Is once a week, every single week, exactly on Monday morning regular? Is multiple times per week regular? What are we shooting for? On an ideal world?
It kind of depends on who else is doing it, right? If you have some crazy, unique topic that you talk about that only like 6 people on the internet have websites for, right? So let's say that there's 6 results on Google for whatever this weird topic is. If Google sees like 3 of those are updating a lot, they'll probably put them at the top because like Google wants you to have fresh content. But you're still going to be on that list. It's just you might end up like at the bottom. If you're at the bottom of 6, it's not a big deal. If you're at the bottom of 6,000, you'll never get discovered. It's more about totally stale content that no one's visiting, that no one's clicking on. And so the nice thing that most podcasts have is usually there's a weekly or monthly release cadence. And with your website, if it's probably going to stay up to date whenever you release a new episode, it kind of takes care of itself. You don't really have to worry about updating it because that new episode gets pulled in from your RSS feed, posted to your website. Google goes to that website automatically all the time and sees, oh, there's new stuff here. And so they say, okay, it's been updated. So as long as your podcast is active, your website will naturally be active also.
Okay. And the RSS feed, it helps it to be updated even like without your efforts. You're plugging it into, you've brought up a couple of different ones out there like Buzzsprout, which is one that we use. We use Libsyn for a lot of clients and things like that. So it's like you can integrate it where on Podpage, like if we're working with you and whether there's a free version, by the way, which is the one that my team did in less than 3 minutes. And then there's also a paid version too. So you can get your own URL, like your own domain name. So the one we have is like podpage.com/the podcast. When I'm updating this RSS feed with Podpage, how simple is it for someone like me who's not tech savvy? In fact, I didn't do this myself. My virtual assistant had to do it. How easy would it be? Obviously, it only took her 3 minutes or less. But what do we need to do to connect this RSS feed through like whoever our hosting platform is so that it updates and integrates on the regular anytime a website and anytime an episode comes up?
Yeah, fortunately, that just sort of is automatic. So when you go to Podpage, it'll say like, I want to preview what my website will look like. You type in the name of your website. So podcast on podcasting. We then will look up all of the podcasts and you'll see your name in the list, assuming you're on Apple Podcasts. You'll click it, we'll grab the RSS feed so you don't have to set anything up. And then essentially like the RSS feed essentially just like when Apple gets a new episode posted to Apple Podcasts, it's pulling it from the RSS feed. When it's on Spotify, right? Basically your host will put that new episode into the RSS feed and then everyone gobbles it up and then displays it. Your website does the exact same thing. There's no different. When you connect, basically we just are aware of what your RSS feed is and we pull in the episodes when they're released.
So in the beginning, when I want that to happen, what is the step that I do? Like, is it simply telling you what my podcast name is and you do all the work? Do I have to go on my hosting platform and copy and paste like some type of RSS feed, whatever, I don't know the technical term for it, and then paste it into your thing? Do I paste something from your thing and put it into my hosting platform? What does that step look like?
If you are on Apple Podcasts, we have a way for you just to search for your podcast. And when you click the name of your podcast, Apple gives us the RSS feed. So you don't ever have to touch it. If you're not on Apple yet, if you're brand new, you can also copy and paste your RSS feed. If you go to any hosting provider, it'll tell you what your RSS feed is. And so you can copy that. Just like when you set up, on Buzzsprout, when you set up RSS feed or a new podcast on Buzzsprout and you go like connect to Apple, they will then send you over to Apple to copy and paste this feed in. It's the same thing, right? So you just grab that feed and you throw it in. But 99.9% of our users, you just type in the name of your podcast, you select it from a list, and we get everything set up for you. So,
okay. Going back to something that I was hoping that the listener could get out of today's episode, it comes from the beginning of the episode as you were talking about how important it was for us to actually not rely solely on MySpace, to not rely solely on Facebook, to not rely solely on Apple.
Mm-hmm.
But to own and control and to connect with offline with our people. And we talked about a website being a beneficial piece to that. But the question that I'm hoping that you can help us with is actually how do, not just by having a website, but what are some of the ways through having a website allow us to gain those email lists so that we can contact our people, even if MySpace gets deleted 12 years ago?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So there's a few different options, and you kind of have to play up for, it's good to provide options for your listeners. And so I'll tell you what Podpage does, but Podpage is inspired by what other sites are you're doing. So we have, there's the basic. You go to a website, I'm sure you've seen this 1,000 times. A couple seconds after you go, a big pop-up happens, and it says, please subscribe to our mailing list, enter your email address here. Sometimes it says, if you subscribe to our mailing list, we'll send you a free ebook. So Podpage does all of that. And so we can collect the websites. Also, the actual service to send the emails is MailChimp and ConvertKit. And there's a bunch of services that are built to send emails. Podpage doesn't actually send emails. We'll collect email addresses, but we won't send emails. Any of those services will give you the widgets you need to collect email addresses on a website. So that's one way to do it, which is just like, hey, person, give me your email address. Another way you can do it is you have a contact form, so you can let people ask you questions and get in touch with you. And then when they get in touch with you, you're going to get their email address, and you can add that to your mailing list. You can just say to people, hey, when you contact me, we're going to add you to our list. That's a little bit better because they're usually contacting you because they need something. And in return, you're going to say, well, we're going to throw you on our list. Another way that people do it through us is through voicemails. So on every pod page at the bottom right, there's a little button for our pro accounts that you click the button and it pops up a little way for listeners just to instantly leave you a voicemail. They can record their voice through the browser. They hit send, they give you an email address, and it shows up in your inbox. And so that's a way where they're getting to connect with you and in addition, give you an email address. So there's a bunch of ways you could do it, but those are some of the different ways. And honestly, I feel like most listeners who care will be open to giving you an email address if they feel like you're going to, in return, not spam them. So going back to, I know it's an outlier example, but Tim Ferriss, he has a very specific offer. He says, sign up for my email address every Friday, I think at some point, sometime in the day, I will send you 5 things that I thought were interesting this week. He doesn't send like huge essays. He just says like, here are 5 bullets. And he calls it 5 Bullet Friday. And he sends 5 bullet points of what he thought was interesting that week. And so listener can be very clear, like, well, I'm not going to get emails all the time from him. I'm signing up for once a week. And that email is just going to be pretty short. And so that's how he chooses to do it. It's just like, give me your email address and you'll get this thing from me.
Yeah.
So other people maybe go through voicemail. If you're not a Podpage user, there's a company called SpeakPipe that I think you can integrate into WordPress sites that does the same kind of thing. People can leave a voicemail on your website. So yeah, a bunch of different ways to do it. I think it all depends on the audience and what they're interested in.
So what I'm hearing is multiple ways to get somebody on your email list. One option is to have a pop-up on the screen of the website, basically say, sign up. And it's that simple. Does Podpage allow for that?
Yeah, every site has a sign up.
Okay.
Every site on Podpage has like a little box where you can just say like sign up here, and also the ability to pop up something that takes over the screen.
Okay. Awesome. Second way that I think I heard was by utilizing some sort of lead magnet. This is like a giveaway in exchange for. You mentioned, I think, Tim is this 5 Bullet Friday. You want to be part of this? Then give me your email. Or you want an ebook? Then give me your email and I'll send it to you. Or you want this free course or any other type of lead magnet is basically like, we'll just exchange this. The third one was just like a contact form. For example, they could be doing Calendly and then you're getting their email list, or they could be filling it out and basically saying like, hey, I have this question, and this is how you get back a hold of me. And the last one is basically these instant voicemails that they can drop, and Podpage allows for that, you said, right? Like that basically means that you say, hey, what questions, you might say this on your podcast. What questions do you have? If you have any questions or if you have any topics you want me to cover, then do this thing. Go to the website, which is created on Podpage. Go to the website and like you can just leave me an instant voicemail. I can play it on the actual episode and I can respond to it. And that's like a way of being able to connect with them. And this gets emailed to you. Is that right? It gets in when you said inbox, you mean like
Yeah, most stuff that happens within Podpages, there's a little like activity list that shows you all the stuff that's going on your website, but it'll also get emailed to you and you can listen to it. So
okay, perfect.
Yeah. And for the voicemail, like one of the tactics people use a lot is they'll say like, hey, thanks for listening today. We'd love to hear from you. Tell us what you thought about the episode. Sometimes they'll say, go rate us on Apple. But sometimes they'll say, go to our website, leave us a voicemail, and we'll pick the 5 best voicemails and play them at the beginning of the next episode or something, right? So There's some sort of an engaging sort of circle.
Love it. So I just want to encourage you, if you're listening, if you got any value from this, awesome, let us know. But here's the thing. If you don't yet have a podcast website, like a dedicated website, try to decide based on what Brenden was talking about. Do you want to grow mainly the business page? Do you want to grow mainly the podcast page? Which one do you prefer gets out in front of the most amount of people? It depends on your goals, as he stated. So if it's like your podcast, now you got to just decide, how are you going to do it? Are you going to build it yourself? Are you already really good with WordPress? There's a lot of things to learn. So if you haven't done it, are you going to do it yourself? Or are you going to spend thousands of dollars for somebody else to build a WordPress site? Are you going to use your hosting page that's sometimes free? Are you going to go to Squarespace and do it there, but maybe struggle with trying to get the RSS feed? Or do you want to use Podpage? I would say like literally just go give it a try because it is free. And I can vouch that it takes less than 3 minutes. And I don't have an affiliate relationship with Brenden or anything like that, just so you know. I'm just saying like my teammate spent less than 3 minutes and got one of these created for one of the websites we manage. So go give it a try. Brenden, what's the website? Like, do they just go to podpage.com and it's as simple as that?
Podpage at singular.com.
Okay, podpage.com.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
Some people say Podpages. It's just Podpage singular. So podpage.com.
Podpage. And if it sounded like I said pages, I didn't even realize that because
I wasn't even thinking. Some people hear that. Yeah.
Okay. Cool. Podpage. And hey, to make it easy, the link is already in the show notes. Scroll down, click, and give it a try. There's a free version and a paid version. Here's what I know about the difference. Free is, it says Podpage and it like has the name of your podcast. The paid is basically you connecting it to your own URL. Is that right, Brenden?
Yeah. The free one, there's a free one that has a basic functionality. You customize it, but it doesn't have things like the voicemail service or review importing or something.
Okay.
And so that's what's free. You can use all that stuff for the first week regardless. For the first week, you get access to every feature. But then if you want to stay on the free plan, it doesn't have some of this advanced functionality. But for a lot of people, that's great. There's a good number of our customers that are fine with the basic plan. But for the free plan, if you want the free plan, but you want to have a custom domain on it, so you want it your.com, that's our basic plan. And then the pro is you get a custom domain and every feature that we have. And so the vast majority of our customers upgrade to pro. But price difference isn't that much. And so most people are on pro.
Cool. Awesome. Anything else you want to leave the listener with?
No, I would say that if you have any questions, when you go to the website, on the bottom right, there's a little help button. It's going to be either me or someone on our team that gets back to you. We've helped thousands and thousands of podcasters launch sites. So if there's anything that's intimidating, I'm sure we can work through it. And yeah, ask around in different podcast group channels about it. Like a lot, we've got so many customers that other people are more than happy to be, evangelists for us. So if you have any questions, let us know. Thanks for your time.
Thank you for jumping on. And I think any resource that's affordable or free, I think is good for our listener. And especially if it helps them to be able to get people on their list, especially if it helps them to rank higher and to be able to control some of this. So thank you for jumping on. I really appreciate it. We use Podpage for our clients and it's just part of what we do. So now that we've learned about it as of just a couple months ago. So I just want to say thank you. Thank you again. I encourage the listener to jump over there and we are out. I'll see you on the next episode. Bye for now.
Cool.
By the way, one way to ensure that you don't miss out on great content that we're producing on a regular basis is to make sure you're subscribed to the show. You need to be subscribed or following the Apple Podcast or wherever you listen to it in order not to miss all of that. And before I let you go, I need to mention, because a lot of people are asking, do you help? Can you help me with this? And the answer is yes. My company actually does it. It's called Grow Your Show. And you can find that at growyourshow.com. Our clients, they call us the easy button for podcaster because they simply have to record their episode and they know that every single thing else is done for them. We sweat the hard stuff so you can be the star of your show. And if you would like help to make sure that we're editing and publishing and promoting and doing your social media, it's all in one place. And I think it's pretty affordable. You'll have to take a look for yourself. Just go to growyourshow.com and check us out. And by the way, I'll see you on the next episode.